It's spring, anglers are on the water, and the fishing's going to the birds. We're going to talk about that on this episode of Fishful Thinker, the podcast. I'm Chad LaChance, and you're listening to Fishful Thinker, the podcast. All things fishful, all the time. Hey guys, Chad LaChance here. Thanks so much for tuning into this episode of Fishful Thinker, the podcast. Of course, brought to us, as always, by the folks at Sportsman's Warehouse. Visit them at sportsmans.com or any one of 140 plus stores nationwide. And don't forget about the folks at Peterson Toyota in Fort Collins, Colorado, ready to take care of all of your car and truck needs. And they've supplied all of my Toyota Tundras dating back to 2007, and that's been quite a fleet. So guys, here we are in May. It's the month that everybody's a hero as far as anglers go. We start seeing lots and lots and lots of fish pics. Fishing's getting really good in my region in general. The moody days of cold spring days and wind and cold fronts and all that start to kind of give way to more consistent fishing. You can count on that typically in May. And it's generally a good time to be on the water, and that's why we've got that fish a day for the month of May going on. That's something we've done for several years. It's the third year doing that now. It's kind of a fun thing. I go out and try to catch one fish every single day. I don't have to go far. It doesn't have to be a glamorous fish. It doesn't have to be a giant fish, anything like that. I just got to go out and try to catch one every day. And that's only because it's a good reason to be on the water. You shouldn't need an excuse. But everybody's busy, everybody's got work going on, everybody's wrapped up in all kinds of stuff. But if you take a little bit of time out of your day and stop and fish every day, I believe it's good for your mental health. And I'll be honest with you, it's been very rough for me this May. And the reason has nothing to do with the fishing. It has to do with my personal health. I'm not going to go into too much detail. Everybody's got their own problems, but I've had some significant stuff that I've been dealing with, and it's kept me from putting in quite the effort or potentially dealing with some of the weather conditions we've dealt with in the last few days here of really cold and heavy rain, things like that. So hasn't been easy for me. I have not hit every day as far as catching one every day this year. So the only reason I even bring any of that up is to set the expectation for everybody involved. I realize you're not going to catch one maybe every day this whole month, but trying is what makes the difference, is getting out and being on the water. And in my case, it's just helpful to me mentally just to get outside for a little bit, even if I can't put a tremendous amount of effort into it because I'm dealing with some health stuff. So any rate, that stuff will work itself out over time. And again, I don't want to harp on that, but in the spirit of honesty, I believe that it's worth doing. So get out, go fish. If you catch one every day, great. If you don't, also great, but at least you made the effort, and that's the goal. So one of the things that helps me in all of my fishing, and I think in generally outdoorsmen overall, the most successful outdoorsmen I know all have one real distinct trait, and it could be hunters or fishermen, just outdoorsmen in general, that are very successful in terms of harvesting game or fish, as the case might be, or catching fish, as the case might be. And that is the powers of observation. I'm a huge believer in the powers of observation, and the people that will harness that and really pay attention to everything that's going on the water and react accordingly. And that's a big statement. Noticing that something happened is one thing. Doing something about it is another. Making a decision based on what you saw happen or what you observed is a whole nother thing. So it's kind of a two-part deal. It's being observant in the first place, recognizing what you observed, and then more importantly, making an adjustment accordingly. And specifically to this one, I want to talk about birds, because I was just out to catch my fish this morning, right before I came in to do this, before the weather came in this afternoon. Used the birds, and it made it very, very easy for me. I literally caught my fish on the third cast this morning. It took me 3 casts to get done and then head back to the house. So how did I make those 3 casts, or how did I pick my spot? It was the birds. And everybody talks about the birds and, oh, you got to fish around the birds. Well, I want to be real specific about some things about birds, because not just birds, but other animals as well will clue you in a lot as to what's going on in the environment around you. And if you take clues from those and apply them to your fishing, you're going to be better off in a lot of scenarios. And so I thought I'd talk about that a little bit right here, because this morning was a really, really classic example of it. And the funny part is I wasn't feeling good, and I really just didn't even want to go out and fish a whole bunch. And again, I'm using the Fish a Day May for good motivation to get me out, because when you're not feeling good, it's even more difficult maybe to find motivation to do anything. And wasn't feeling great, didn't really want to go out. And then I went out and I'm looking around, and one thing I noticed right away, for the first time in about 8 or 9 days, I had two different birds feeding in an area that historically has fish this time of year, but has not had fish because of some weird water conditions that are going on here. So for the last 8 or 9 days, the lake started dropping like crazy. And what that did is pull fish out of an area they would normally be, because they're trying to come in to spawn and they're trying to come in to feed as the water warms and the lake rises. Well, I don't want to get too far off on tangents here, but the lake that I am referencing is an irrigation lake, and it fills maybe a half dozen reservoirs downstream from it as well. Well, right this minute, they're pulling water out of the lake to fill other reservoirs downstream, and therefore our water is dropping like crazy, like 5 feet or something in 9 days. And what that does is moves fish around. So an area that I was previously catching fish, all of a sudden I quit catching fish right at the end of April when they started pulling the water out. And this morning, the classic example was this. I'm looking out and I'm like, well, I'm going to have to get in the truck and go somewhere because there aren't fish around here. So I better go whatever. Well, while I look out there, then I realize there's a heron out there. And, now wait, that's a good sign because the heron's back. And then I'm paying attention, and like 30 seconds later, after I realize the heron's there, and I'm just kind of looking out over the water to see if there's any, evidence of anything going on, any reason I should maybe try fishing here again, even though I haven't caught a fish there in like 8 days. And I've tried every day. I realized, there's a kingfisher right there as well. And the kingfisher's sitting up in one of the cottonwood trees, and he makes their signature kind of cackling call and dives straight down, comes right back up, and he's got a minnow. Well, immediately I run back to the garage, grab a rod out of the rod rack, and head back out to fish. And like I said, the third cast, I caught one. And I haven't caught a fish in that area in like 8 or 9 days. Not even close to that area, including fishing it several times a day. There has also not been birds there. And so that is a big statement, because normally when the lake is filling and all the fish are happy, there'd be all kinds of feeding birds back here. There'd be herons, there'd be eagles, there'd be kingfishers, there'd be cormorants, there'd be grebes, there'd be seagulls. All of them are gone until this morning, which is the first time the weather broke, and I don't know yet because I haven't had a chance to check the charts, but I'd be willing to bet they may have shut the outlet off as well. Those birds clued me in, because one thing you can count on about that heron and that kingfisher and the rest of the birds I mentioned, the cormorants and the grebes and all of them, they know where the fish are. And when I say the fish, they know where the fish are. They know where the fish they can eat are. The fish they can eat can also be eaten by bass and walleyes and trout and all the other fish that live in the lake as well. That kingfisher didn't catch a smallmouth bass. Actually, he could have. I don't know. It was only maybe 2 inches long or 3 inches long, whatever he caught. But he didn't catch a 12-incher, 14-incher. But the 12 or 14-incher will eat whatever that kingfisher caught. And that's the important thing about the whole deal. And because when the water started dropping, the birds vacated. And I had a conversation with a friend of mine about, I bet you the fish are gone. And maybe I jinxed myself or whatever, but sure enough, there hasn't been any fish in here at all since they started moving the water in this area that I'm talking about. And yet this morning, the birds showed back up and the fish were in there. And it didn't take the birds very long. Yesterday afternoon, in the wind and the rain, I still wasn't catching fish in there. And this morning, the fish are back. So that should tell you something right there. But not all birds are created equally, and not all scenarios of finding birds automatically means you're going to catch fish. And that's really a key thing. And so let's talk about that a little bit. So First of all, let's talk about the heron, because herons, first of all, one of my favorite birds of all. They're very cool birds, blue herons, white herons, any of the heron family birds, very cool. Also extremely fast and extremely sharp, but don't ask me how I know. Watching the heron, they'll come in and they'll land and they'll look around, and you can see them. They'll just observe. They're stand there for a minute, look around, and they're looking. And if you give a bird 5 minutes of your time, a bird like that, he'll teach you a lot about where the fish are, what they're doing, as far as the small fish go. And that's the clue you need as an angler, right? The food chain is your friend. So I watch this heron for a few minutes when they come in. Every time they come in, I'll watch the herons. And the heron was walking around shallow water and immediately went into stalk mode. And when they do that, it's because he knows something's there. That same heron, or a heron, I should say, the same species anyway, was here a couple of days ago. He walked about 20, 25 yards worth of the shallow water, never really even slowed down, looked around a little bit and flew off. And I made a comment to my neighbor, I'm like, well, nobody's back in here yet, or that heron would have stayed longer. He wouldn't have flown in back here, landed, took a chance on landing, and then walked around and then flew off if there was fish there to eat. Now he's back a few days later, and lo and behold, the fish are here. So this time he landed, walked for just a minute or two, realized, went into stalk mode. Now he's waiting for fish, and next thing you know, he's straight up fishing. And so that's very important to not notice just that the birds are there, but what those birds are doing. Had I looked out the window this morning and I realized that the heron is just sitting there roosted on one of the floating logs or something, well, then I would not have cared. But he was actively hunting. And the same thing with the kingfisher. The kingfisher, I didn't even realize he was in the tree until I heard him, and they have a very distinct call. And then, boom, sure enough, straight down into the ditch he went, popped right back up, and he had fish in his mouth, or a fish in his mouth. And so that was the clue. But just because there's a kingfisher or a heron there, if they're roosted, that doesn't tell me that the fish are in there or much of anything other than their fish may be in the region. And it may be that the fish are there just fine, but they're not accessible to the heron. In other words, maybe they're a little too deep and the heron needs to wait till low light periods when they come up into shallower water. There's nuances to it that affect the birds as well. But as a general rule, birds that are roosted are not birds I'm chasing, so to speak. So the same concept would be seagulls. Also one of my favorite birds, probably because I grew up in South Florida. Anytime I can hear the seagulls making noise, I know I'm near water and it makes me happy. It's a weird Pavlovian thing, but if I can hear seagulls, I'm a happy camper. Well, seagulls will sit out in the main lake here and they'll just be roosted all day long. And I'll have people that every single year I get the same email. Man, I was around birds all day long, didn't catch any fish. Well, if there's 5,000 seagulls sitting on the water, well, they're not doing anything when they're sitting on the water. It's just a spot to roost. The seagulls you need are the ones that are what I call popping. They're bobbing up and down into the water. And what they're doing, they'll fly up to get enough elevation where they can see, and then they'll drop right back down and grab something. Usually in that scenario, they'll have a scout. It'll be a single or a couple of seagulls that are way up high. And if you look way above the water, you'll see them up there. There'll be one or two seagulls circling way up there, and they're the scouts. They're the ones that are looking to see where the bait fish may be coming to the surface where they can be caught. And that's the whole key. And it goes back to what I said about the heron. You can't, just because fish are roosted doesn't mean there aren't fish there. It just means they're not within range of those birds. It doesn't mean they're not sitting there waiting. Like the heron standing on a log out here that's just roosted there, just sitting there watching. He's waiting for something to give him a sign to fish, and then he will start to fish. But if he's actively fishing, you can bet there's fish in that shallow water, or he wouldn't be doing it. They have to be very, very efficient. They're better at stuff than we are as far as that goes. So seagulls are the same thing. If they're all out there roosted, I don't care how many seagulls are out there. Geez, they could be migrators that just happen to be flying through and sat down in the lake. You don't know, but when they're actively feeding, then I know I need to fish around them. Kingfishers, same thing. Very loud little bird. They could be nested. That's a key thing. They might just be nested somewhere, particularly right now. But as the summer wears on, they won't be. And when you see one that's consistently in a tree day in and day out, I can tell you that there's consistent small fish that he can eat right there. Because kingfishers eat fish up to maybe, I don't know, biggest I've seen, maybe 4 or 5 inches long. In other words, perfect eating size fish for everybody that I want to catch. And so kingfishers are one of my favorite because they know where there's bait for certain. And so same thing, if he's actively hunting, and they'll make noise when they're actively hunting, you'll see them fly from tree to tree, just a short distance, keep looking for different views. They're looking for little tiny bait fish on the surface, and they will grab them. Because a kingfisher only weighs maybe, I doubt they weigh a half a pound, they can't get very deep, even with a full blasting dive, just they're not heavy enough. So whatever he needs to catch has to be within a few inches of the surface, so they're very picky about where they dive. And if you ever watch kingfishers, they rarely miss. They pretty much always score, and so they're pretty picky about where they dive. So if you know there's kingfishers diving in a bay somewhere, well, maybe that's a good spot to throw a topwater or a very shallow running bait, because whatever they're catching is very high in the water column. Super important. Same thing with the seagulls. They can't get very deep. They won't. Now, what about other species of birds? One that we see here commonly in the West that I think is a big one is grebes. And you watch grebes, western grebes, I'm blanking out the name of the other ones, western grebes, and there's one other one. You'll see them schooling fish. I've seen this quite a bit where they're swimming along and they're schooling fish. You'll see them stick their head underwater and look, and then pull their head back out of the water and keep swimming. They're schooling fish from the surface, and they'll get them pushed in and then they'll dive on them. But again, you could see grebes that aren't doing anything, and then you can see them scouting where they're swimming around the surface, sticking their head underwater, and they're looking, and then you can see them actively going underwater and coming up and going underwater and coming up. Well, if they're actively diving and coming back up, they're probably actually hunting, which means they found something. So there again, if I see grebes and I see them diving, I know there's bait fish right there. The difference between grebes and some of the others is they can swim underwater, which means they can swim as deep as they need within reason to catch fish. Same thing with the cormorants, or the mergansers, the hooded mergansers. Either way, same thing. They can all swim underwater. If they are diving and popping up and they're going underwater and they're underwater for 5 to maybe 20 seconds at a time, and then they pop back up, they're feeding, and that's a good spot for you to fish. Loons can be the same thing. I've had loons be very, very good indicators. In fact, one of the best consistent multi-species bites we've ever filmed, we had Dan Spangler, where Dan Spangler's the hard bait development manager for Berkley, was in the boat. We were in South Dakota, and we had a common loon that was feeding next to the boat. Well, in one 8-minute clip, it's a continuous clip, a video clip, so I know exactly what happened. The camera rolled for the whole 8 minutes. In that 8 minutes, Dan caught 4 and I caught 2 walleyes and smallmouth between us. We mixed up and caught 6 fish in 8 minutes, all of them respectable size, all of them on film at the same time, and at no point during that was this loon any farther than a half a cast from the boat. And it kept going back and forth under the boat, obviously feeding in the same frenzy that we were smashing with a crankbait, one after the other after the other. And to catch fish at that rate on a crankbait without moving the boat isn't so, and of quality of fish like that and mixed species tells you that there was a serious feed going on underneath our boat. And that loon was in on that feed at the same time that we were. And if you've ever spent time around loons, you know they aren't generally real friendly. They don't like to spend a lot of time right around boats. They're a little bit shy. They spend some time out away from you. They're not afraid of boats per se, but they don't generally fish right next to your boat. In this case, our boat was sitting on a drop-off that was so loaded with fish that the loon didn't care. There was times when he was within 5 or 6 feet of the edge of the boat, and he was clearly watching us doing our thing, and he kept going back under the boat, and he'd come back up with a mouthful of something, and he'd go back under the boat and feed again. Clearly, he was eating on the same stuff that the bass and the bluegills were eating. So loons, cormorants, mergansers, and grebes all swimming underwater will give you a little bit different perspective, but the same thing. I don't care how many of them are sitting on the bank. I don't care how many, cormorants are sitting on the power lines or the trees. What I care is how many of them are actively hunting, and that's a big difference in fishing around birds and fishing around the right birds. So if you've got a scenario where there's been a bunch of birds in there and you've been in there, maybe you're in a tournament, a couple day tournament, maybe you're on a camping trip and you've been watching, herons or kingfishers or something feeding, in some cases even eagles, although the eagle that's been in here the last 2 years, I've only seen him catch wounded fish. I've never seen him catch a healthy one. He picks up more dead ones than he does healthy ones from what I can tell. So that's an interesting concept there. But any of the birds, the key is that they be hunting. They can't be just sitting around, because sitting around does not indicate you much of anything other than the fact that that bird happens to live near water. and that's the only thing. But if you've got an area that's had a bunch of birds in it and they've been feeding and now they're gone, that will probably make my decision as far as moving real quick. If I'd been catching fish, let's say that I've got a bay, right? And the heron's been feeding in here every morning and they're doing their thing and I've been catching fish. The first morning I come out and there's no herons out there, I'm going to spend about half as much time fishing before I make a decision to do something else. In other words, go somewhere else to fish, because those herons will automatically put the doubt in my brain. They were here for, say, 3 days in a row and now they're gone. Well, whatever they were eating left with them, or actually left ahead of them, or they wouldn't have left. Therefore, there's a good shot my bait source that was holding my fish, my sport fish, has also left. And it won't take me long to figure that out, because I've been on fish, and been catching them. Now the heron goes away. Now the bait fish is gone. I use that as my indicator. Let's say I would have fished for 10 minutes without making a change. Now I might only fish for 5, because the environment's already telling me that the indicators are that my bait source is gone. And so that's really important. And I'm often said, real quick, let me back up a tiny bit here, that the only reason I care what fish are eating, in other words, match the hatch mindset, the only reason I care what they're eating is so that I have an idea of where they're eating. Well, by the same token, the birds give me a clue as to where the fish are eating, right? And so that's the really important thing. And I don't care what the species is of fish we're talking about. We could be talking about saltwater and brown pelicans, which will also herd fish. As I mentioned, I've seen grebes do. Brown pelicans, or white pelicans for that matter, will herd fish up against hard structure and then feed on them. A couple things about pelicans: if you are feeding around them, whether it be fresh or saltwater, fishing around them, I should say. If you're feeding around them, good for you. That's a unique thing. Call you the Birdman. But if you're fishing around them, the higher they're going before they dive, the deeper your bait fish are. The shallower they're staying before they dive, the shallower your bait fish are, and the same thing with the level of vigor it takes to swallow them. So you can get a pretty good idea. If I spend, again, 5 minutes watching a herd of white pelicans I got a private lake here in town I fish occasionally. It's got a bunch of white pelicans on it. I'll spend 5 minutes when I get there just watching the pelicans. Like, somebody says, well, wouldn't you just go fish? Why don't you just go fish? No, I'll stand for 5 minutes on the edge of the lake and watch the pelicans, because that 5 minutes will teach me, are they feeding on the shad? Are they feeding on the young of the deer shad or the bigger shad? In other words, are they having to dive more to get them? What do they look like when they have them in their gullet? Does it appear they have a 4-inch fish in their gullet, or can I even tell there's no fish in there because it's little tiny fish? So those things will help me a lot. If they're trying to school fish, if I can watch them where they're herding fish, well, I know they're pushing a school of fish around. A flock of pelicans is not going to try to herd 1 or 2 fish. They're going to try to herd a whole school of fish. And so that will give me an idea of how deep my fish is, how big they are, and how many of them they are based on how the pelicans are working together. And then I can make a decision as to how I want to start presenting a bait for the largemouth that live in that lake. If the pelicans are not even leaving the surface of the water and they're just literally sticking their head in and grabbing young of the year shad right into the surface, Well, I'm going topwater fishing. That's all there is to it. And it's going to be a small topwater. But if they're getting 30 feet in the air and tucking their wings and going full blast and coming up with what appears to be a clearly full gullet, I know they're chasing 2-year-old or 3-year-old shad, and I'll fish a bigger bait and I'll fish it deeper. So that'll make a difference as to how I'll make my decisions based on what those birds teach me before I've even got in the boat. And that's an important part of it. And the pelicans are a good teacher for that kind of thing, as far as, to help you get some things going on. Another thing that's not quite so clear, but it's still tied to the birds, it particularly is a case where if it's a lake you don't know anything about, is things like coots. And the reason coots, and nobody likes coots, they're not particularly fun, birds for any reason. They're kind of a mess to fish around. But the thing about coots is they know where the grass beds are. So if you don't know where there's an offshore weed bed somewhere and there's a flock of coots that are working that area, you can bet that there's grass beds under the surface right there, which means I can locate a high spot in a lake in Kansas, which I'm using as an exact example because I have always binoculars in my boat. I could see that there were birds moving around a bunch, but they were like a half mile away. I looked binoculars up, I surmised that, hey, they're coots. So I run down there in the boat, and sure enough, on a lake I'd never been to, there's a big old high spot in the middle of the lake, and it's got a grass patch on top of it. And I probably don't even need to tell you what happened in that grass patch when I started ripping a war pig through it, a lipless crankbait, and loading up on pike and bass and walleyes. They were all in that grass patch that I didn't even know was there in this lake that isn't mapped. But those coots knew where it was, and they told me from a half mile away where that spot was. So the birds were a clue right there. And even though coots are vegetarians, or actually I think they're omnivores, I think they eat bugs and stuff as well, but they're not eating bait fish, let's put it that way. They still clued me in as to where the structure and cover was that I needed to find and help me out right there. So it's not just about the birds themselves, but the activity level of those birds and what they're doing that makes all the difference in the world. And this morning, literally when I was a little bit mentally down, I wasn't really feeling great. I was like, man, I don't know if I got the effort to go out. The weather's going to turn again this afternoon. Well, wait a minute, there's a heron feeding right there, and there's a kingfisher too. Well, hey, I could probably catch a fish right there pretty easy, and sure enough, I did, which actually made me feel pretty good because it's great to recognize a scenario and make it pay right away. And that's exactly what happened right there. And it's something I pride myself on as an outdoorsman, is being very observant. And that includes the same when I'm hunting. It's a matter of looking at changes in your environment, looking at patterns in your environment. All of those things are tied together. And the more observant you are, the less you're hung up on magic lures and all the other things, and the more you focus on in your environment, that's how you get those people that you hear that, hey, he's just a fishy guy. That's just a fishy kind of guy. Or that guy always catches fish. I guarantee it ain't because he has a secret lure. It's because he's paying attention to the whole environment day in and day out, noticing subtle changes and acting accordingly on his gut. And those birds have a real simple mind. They mate once a year, they roost, and they feed. And that's what they do. So if they're feeding, their food source is there, and you need to take advantage of that if you want them to help you catch more fish. So I appreciate you guys tuning in, and if you want to join the conversation on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, or X, we'd appreciate that. Hopefully you're watching this podcast or listening to this podcast on YouTube, but if you're not, check that out as well. There's 700 plus videos there. Check those out. We'd appreciate that, and subscribe while you're there. And of course, we're airing 7 days a week on World Fishing Network and 5 on Altitude Sports Entertainment. So thanks for listening. This has been Fishful Thinker, the podcast.